My experience with the story that we're about to tell actually started from this book right here, which is, and I'll get a little bit closer, A Well-Paid Slave. Now, some people might not be familiar with the name Curt Flood, but anybody, and I do mean anybody, not only in Major League Baseball, but professional sports in North America really owes a lot to this man. We are so honored to have his daughter on, Miss Shelly Flood. Shelly, how are you doing this afternoon?
I do well, thank you, and thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for taking and making the time. And first off, share a little bit of the backstory of Curt Flood, the player, because even to this day, there are people that still don't know not only just how great a player he is, but the sacrifice that he made. So walk through with our viewers the backstory, please.
I usually start by telling people my dad is responsible for free agency as we know it today. I tell them that when my father played, there was a paragraph in the owner-player contract called the reserve clause, which meant once you signed to be on that team, you signed away your professional rights. That now that owner had the right to make all of your professional choices, how much money you made, what team you played for, and you really didn't have any say-so in it. When my father got traded in 1969, he didn't want to go, so he sued Major League Baseball for the right to negotiate his own contract. That was unheard of. He wanted all the teams to understand that he was available, and then that way he'd be able to negotiate his own professional future. That didn't happen. So Dad didn't show up for spring training, and he took Major League Baseball to court, all the way to the Supreme Court.
And I'm glad you walked through that with us, because some people honestly don't know how contracts used to be. And
Right.
like you said before, because of your dad's principles, and I want to stress that, he felt this is what needed to be done, not just for him, but for virtually any player, not only at that time, but even to this day. Walk through a little bit, if you can, just a little bit more of that dynamic from, for lack of a better term, the battles that had to be fought in order for, and correct me if I'm wrong, free agency in Major League Baseball started around 1974, 1975, if I'm not mistaken?
No, that's correct. Andy Messersmith and Dave McNally played a year without a signed contract and were deemed free agents through arbitration. That wasn't available for my father, the ability to sit down and negotiate those things that have been put in place through what we now know as free agency. My dad's principles go far and beyond just what we see in Major League sports. He just was a man that believed in activism. He believed in equality and justice. And he also believed that he was very fortunate to play Major League sports. And who was he not to speak up on the behalf of those that didn't have a voice or were in less fortunate situations? If one is still in bondage, we're all in bondage. And he felt that way.
And I'm glad you mentioned that, because again, some people simply just don't know. And part of our job is to help amplify and share these narratives. So subsequently, the legal battles were fought. Free agency is established. Walk through with our viewers what was next, like what basically happened. So now you have this, quote, landmark achievement, which it truly is when you look at today's game. But what happened next?
For my father, it was a knowing that what he had set into motion was now coming to fruition. It was not affecting his life personally. He was watching those players that came up behind him reap the fruit of his sacrifice. And in the beginning, I would assume that my father had some real disturbance in his spirit about not being aligned with what was basically, what his envisioned for Major League Sports and how players are treated and paid. it took years, for him to resolve how he really felt. I can't really tell you, verbatim, he felt this way, because he was a very proud man, and he was not going to piss and moan and kick rocks. He was going to move through the success of that he had set into motion with dignity, respect for himself and those that were being blessed by what had happened.
Now, outside of his achievements professionally, your dad, I'll say versatile. One of the talents that I discovered when I read the book A Well-Paid Slave was his talent as an artist. Can you walk through with our viewers, we say Renaissance man, but this was just a man who was well-versed in so many different areas. Speak to our audience a little bit about his ability as an artist.
It was an exceptional gift. Artistry is a divine gift, and it was probably our first language before we had letters. We were able to draw, and my father can draw anything. He was a phenomenal painter, carpenter. He played a huge role in all of those dynamics. There was nothing that creatively with his hands he did not challenge himself to do. He laid some tile in my bathroom one time and it was beautiful. There's a painting of me that my father did, and it is in my mother's house right now. It's an extraordinary piece of him connected to me. And in a lot of his, a lot of the articles that were written about him, that picture is there, the portrait that he did of me.
And again, that is just completely amazing is an understatement. So here you are, Mr. Flood, accomplished baseball player, accomplished in regards to the personal and professional sacrifices for really the betterment of the game, especially the betterment of, like you said, players having their voice. A well-rounded artist, carpenter, literally, I don't even want to say a jack of all trades. It was almost like he was a crowning achievement with everything he did. Yeah. So with all these wonderful things, walk through with us the timeline, especially when it comes to the larger recognition from not only just Major League Baseball, but for all sports. So walk through a couple of those moving parts, where they're moving fluidly, but where we need to put a little bit of extra elbow grease or some, I remember growing up, the 3-in-1 oil, the little metal can. Where do we need to put, where have we made progress regarding your father's story, and where do we need to squeeze a little extra elbow grease or that 3-in-1 oil to make it a little bit smoother?
Yeah, I get the 3-in-1. Let's see. It's been a long journey for my siblings and I, because we were very young when our father was going through this. I was born in 1961. The case, he was traded in 69. It was over by 72. By that time, I was 10 or 11 years old. A lot had happened. It took a very long time for the general public to understand the history. We're at that place right now with the internet that if you Google my father's name, you're going to get a plethora of articles that are going to give you the insight and the history. And it's basically pretty accurate. In 2011, the Missouri Sports Hall of Fame, 2015, the St. Louis Cardinals Hall of Fame. We have the Major League Baseball's Players Association naming an annual award in my father's name that was recently awarded to Andre Dawson, who is a Cooperstown Hall of Famer. I don't know what else has got to happen for them to push him into historical placement. The Cooperstown Museum houses the history of baseball. How can you omit this piece of the transition in labor rights, commerce, how the negotiations to other teams happen? How can you do that without including Curt Flood? I believe it's going to happen we're at the fifth year. Every 5 years, the Golden Era Committee votes. The Players Association, the Writers Association, sports writers, vote. Nominate. Then the old timers, the Golden Era, they vote, and the induction happens. We're a year behind because of COVID. We're looking for December for his name to be on the ballot. And I have my fingers crossed.
And I'm glad, again, you're walking through with it, because I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, for the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame, a player has to be retired for a certain number of years. And I know that when their name gets on the ballot, it's a 10-year window where they have to get at least 75% of the vote. Then after that, it would go to the Veterans Committee and then any other special committees. So you're talking about a player whose career, I'll say, technically ended when he started that lawsuit. I'll go ahead and say it. So now here we are 50 some odd years later. And while there's been some progress, like you said, within the state of Missouri, the St. Louis Cardinals, this and that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but two of the other figures, I want to say the legal counsel that helped and the head of the Players Association are in the hall, but the person who basically was the catalyst is not. Please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
No, I believe that's accurate. There's a lot of, I don't know how to explain it, things that don't connect. There are people that are in the Hall of Fame for their player success that have less stats than my father. That was said on KTLA Channel 5 News the other night in the interview that my siblings and I did. I don't want to put a lot of controversy on this. I think what needs to happen needs to happen. The people that have been protesting or causing this not to happen are either no longer there or they really need to wake up. It's who censors history? Give the fan base the right to know how their game. If this is America's game, Andrew, then it needs to be America's history and it needs to be accurate. It doesn't get any simpler than that.
I tell you what, you put that in as most straightforward and accessible a manner as possible. And like you said before, part of the Hall of Fame is what? Telling the history. What was positive, what was far from it. And when you're looking at a person such as your father, who again, arguably during the prime of his career, decided to let his conscience be at the forefront and do what he did, not for himself, but for the betterment of the game and the betterment of the players. And when you fast forward to last season, and I even though he played with Boston, I grew up a Yankees fan, still a Yankees fan, but even though he played most of his career with Boston, to see, a player like Mookie Betts get what he's getting. And for people that don't know, he is starting his second year with the Los Angeles Dodgers. He signed the largest contract extension in Major League history and is the second highest paid player in the game. But when I see that, those types of deals going on, of course you're happy for the player, but then you think it wouldn't have happened if somebody, for lack of a better term, didn't get on the front line or the main line or the picket line or whatever line. So let me ask you this, and especially speaking with fans of baseball, fans of professional sports, especially in North America, two things. In addition to going online, what are some ways that will help them be better aware of the work of your father? And then second, what are things that you are still doing to continue to advocate for your father being in the hall that other people can get behind to continue to get this momentum going that we've seen in recent years?
I think I missed your first question, but I will come through on the second one. The campaign is Curt Flood, the number 4. It's hashtag Curt Flood, the number 4, Cooperstown. And we have been publishing that hashtag now since pandemic. We had no idea the summer before last that we were headed into this huge health pandemic. Hashtag Curt Flood, the number 4, Cooperstown, is our campaign. I believe that when people have these discussions, they need to connect those hashtags so we can see what across the country, how people feel. Most of it is very positive. Most baseball fans want to see this happen. Every now and then I get some negativity on these comment threads. And just recently, there are some people that don't want to see this happen. Wow. Who are these people? Name names. Let's have a discussion about why. Because as his child, I don't understand. This is history. This is our father's legacy. This is the story of baseball. Who would not want to tell that story correctly? What was the first question?
Yeah, the first question. Oh gosh, now you're putting me on the spot. I think the first question, my question leading into that was, in addition to people doing, let's say, their Google search or what have you, what are other ways that people can find out more of your dad's backstory? I know I shared my deeper introduction with the book A Well-Paid Slave, but what are some other texts or documentaries or things along those lines where people can, like you said, get a broader view of the larger snapshot of the man?
Fortunately for my grandson, when he's looking for those answers that he can't get from me or his mother, the internet has provided so much. There's the HBO documentary, A Curious Case of Curt Flood. You can find that on YouTube. There are 7 books written about my father, including the one that he wrote himself, The Way It Is. And I've been told that The Way It Is such an extraordinary outline of Major League Baseball and how it plays out in the labor lane. Dad knew and he told it. So there, the history is there for the learning. And if you're really that curious or deficient in it, I just have to turn you to do your research online.
Well, I tell you what, Ms. Flood, I know I'm being formal. I'll be a little bit more like Shelly. First off, as we get ready to wind down your segment, number one, just thank you for taking the call. I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there. Thank you for taking the call to come on. Number two, thank you and your siblings and everybody else who understands the importance and relevance and is continuing to advocate. And thank you for sharing. Like you said, please repeat that hashtag so that way we can help get that trending, so it provides that additional nudge or that additional squeeze of that 3-in-1 oil, so we can go ahead and get that next thing on the horizon taken care of.
Hashtag Curt Flood, the number 4, Cooperstown.
And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Miss Shelly Flood. Shelly, we wish you, your family, everybody who's advocating for your father, continued blessings, well wishes, and success. And we're just going to say it's a matter of when instead of a matter of if. So what we're going to do, ladies, that's exactly it. We're putting that out there in the universe.